So there's going to be a lot more need for not just an open type of storage solution, but a secured one. So the demand and a need for these secured solutions, secured memory, I think will continue on.
In this episode of Embedded Insiders, we're joined by Principal Analyst at global technology intelligence firm ABI Research, Reece Hayden, to discuss the recent global tariffs and the effects of this on supply chains, manufacturing costs, and expansion. Next, Ken sits down with Jun Kawaguchi, Global Marketing Executive for the Secure Flash product family at Winbond, to discuss the challenges of securing today's AI, automotive, and industrial embedded systems.
Hello, engineers, developers, and friends. Welcome to yet another episode of Embedded Insiders, the weekly show where we try to talk about some of the cool industry issues and exciting developments in embedded technology. I'm Ken Briota with Embedded Computing Design, and I'm here with Rich Nass, our fearless leader, Tiara Oliver, the muscle behind how we make all this works, and our special guest for this intro, Reece Hayden with ABI Research. Hello, everybody.
Hey. Welcome. You said we talk about cool stuff. This topic is super important, but I don't think I'd put it in the category of cool. It's actually more scary than cool.
I mean, maybe I'm using cool in the most Gen X possible manner.
Okay. All right. So you want to fill the audience in on what we're talking about?
Yeah, for sure. But first of all, Reece, welcome to Embedded Insiders.
Thanks, Ken. Great to speak to you today. Excited to talk everything tariffs, everything that's happening at the moment, and all the fluctuation in the AI market at the moment.
Honestly, I know I'm extremely glad to have you here to talk about everything having to do with these tariffs and how it's impacting not just the U.S. market, but the entire global tech and embedded market, because it means that I don't have to as much. And the waters here are murky and ever changing, it seems like. I think the first thing we have to talk about at time of recording, the most recent news is that it looks like maybe there's an agreement between the US and China to maybe not tariff each other.
Or to make it very small. I think we're down to 10% tariff in both directions on most stuff. Not on everything, but on most stuff.
What do you think of this sort of tentative deal, Reece? Do you think it'll stick this time?
Honestly, again, as you've mentioned, it's nearly impossible to say. But I think for the meantime, in terms of when we look at semiconductors, when we look at the AI market, the exemptions around the at least heavy hitting AI compute stuff is still in play. That's not changed too much. I think that's one area where we're seeing both the US and China respecting the central element that these kind of chips play in the market and how important they are for kind of the competitive dynamic. So I think in general, those exemptions will stay. I think there'll be still a huge amount of fluctuation around what percentage tariffs are going to be on all other goods. But I think for a while now, at least in the semiconductors and end products, so smartphones and laptops and stuff like that, we're going to see an amount of exemptions happening just to protect those really big newsworthy items, which are honestly scaring a lot of the world in terms of the impact it can have on how much of a price surge. So if you kind of look at when we talked about that 125% tariff that China could have been putting on, when you kind of consider that may have impacted at one point, it won't now, I don't think, but at one point it may have impacted any chips manufactured in the US and the impact that could have had on the development of the foundry businesses there. It would have been dramatic.
Yeah. I'm curious about how this is impacting, especially, those root technologies, the semicon and the end product stuff in the rest of the world, because, Rich and I and Tierra are based here in the US. And so a lot of our news and a lot of what we see is what's going on is US focused. I know it's got to be impacting some of the markets and development elsewhere. Are you seeing increased investment in places in response to all this? What else is going on?
From my perspective, I think it's the challenge here is obviously the lack of stability in terms of we don't know exactly what's going to be there in a day. We don't know what's going to be there next week. So
Yeah.
I think the challenge there in terms of shifting that investment round from one market to another is nearly impossible to do overnight. So I think in terms of when you talk to vendors in the market, they're very concerned. They're looking at other options, but their kind of long-term investment strategy hasn't shifted that much. Kind of when we look, they want to reduce their reliability on highly tariff markets, on these kind of precarious areas, but they're really they're trying to stick the course as much as they can and absorb some of these pressures and expect it to fluctuate over a period of time and wait for it to become a more stable situation before making those decisions.
So is that what you advise people to do? I mean, people don't come to us for advice, although sometimes they do, but they don't pay us for advice. They do pay you for your advice. Is that what you're telling them? To wait?
I think so. In terms of, from my perspective, I think staying the course, understanding that it's going to be a huge fluctuation in where the supply chain needs to be and what it needs to be. But this is part of a wider trend that's been going on for a number of years now around reshoring, around bringing supply chains into countries and bringing them into more domestic. So if we take the EU, obviously that moves at a unbelievably slow pace. But if we look over the last 5 years, there's been continuous demand for semiconductors to come into Germany. There's been foundries popping up or slowly popping up all over the place. And there's been significant investment over the last couple of years, which will eventually lead to the reshoring of supply chains. But as kind of we speak to these players, the short-term plans can't change. The medium-term plans are largely staying the same as they have been over the last couple of years. And the long-term plans are doing the same thing.
You know, we're not doing our jobs if we don't ask some questions that seem seem to make everyone a little bit uncomfortable, but expose the elephants in the room. And we're not a political publication, so we avoid those. But there is some indication that a lot of this trade war, tariff piece is, while having real impacts on lives and stuff, saber rattling and making a lot of noise to try to get agreements or favorable negotiating position and things like that. Is that talk also happening in the rooms that you are having conversations in, Reece? If you're able to say, is there some hope for the folks out there listening who are getting impacted by these instabilities and fluctuations to know that maybe this is going to settle out because these are negotiating tactics, not real threats in some cases?
Yes, I definitely agree. And I think a lot of people are seeing not through what's happening here. And it is having a significant impact on the pace at which decisions are being made and how they're being made and kind of reframing where people are looking in the market. But I think generally speaking, they recognize that a lot of these aspects, especially when we're talking about the technology element of it, they're critical. And the US, and within the US-China kind of AI race, which has been going on for a number of years now, these are key elements. So I think they understand that when the US are putting tariffs on there, they want a reaction, and then they want to come to a, let's call it fair, let's call it unfair trade deal at the end of the day, which can show benefit on their side, but also doesn't significantly damage their economic development and also their technology sector development. Because if we look at kind of how it's panned out, we've seen the tariffs go up immediately, all tech stocks dived off the next day. Tariffs come off, trade stocks go up again the next day. So you can see that the market is recognizing that although that the tariffs are going to remain in place at the moment, the kind of they are looking past that and they are seeing the longer term opportunities come about. But having said that, it will be a major shift. Whatever's happening, whatever trade deal was worked out, there will be a significant shift at the end of the day, impacting technology companies in the US.
Does anybody benefit in the short term?
I haven't seen it yet.
Well, I guess if you know when and if the tariffs are going to take effect, you'd be able to benefit.
I think that's basically it. I think if you have your mystic ball and you can look into the future a day or two and you can figure it out, I think that those people benefit. But other than them, I don't think anyone's benefited yet.
Interesting.
I will dig down into the history forever and talk about whether or not this is unprecedented use of material things like this for negotiating purposes. But I'd rather try to look forward and give people a sense of what might be coming. It looks to me that we are getting closer to an equilibrium wherever that lands. Do you think that there's a chance that this becomes a more regular tactic and that it comes up again in other areas for leverage in other places, not just involving the US, but elsewhere? Does this become a lesson?
I really hope not, but I would have to, if we look at what's been happening and we look at all the various decisions being taken at the moment, I think it will continue to happen. And I think eventually, and at the moment, we're kind of speaking from a position where a lot of the AI supply chain, mainly semiconductors and smartphones and laptops, are exempt even from the new tariffs that have been put in place. And I can foresee that if we look at everything like this, everything that's happened so far in the last only 5 months or however long it's been, we're going to see at some point it being used as a tool to try and reshape the semiconductor map and try and bring a lot of that foundry business, that the TSMC heavy stuff, as much into the US as possible. The challenge there being, when we look at the AI supply chain, moving that around and moving those pieces is enormously challenging, enormously investment intensive, and it's a long-term plan with kind of foundry businesses and fabs. They're taking 8+ years to get up to full capacity and full efficiency before they can start to make real money off the back of it. So I think, yes, it will be a tool. I think that's going to be utilized. And at some point, I expect it to hit the semiconductor AI market.
Yeah.
You could certainly make the argument that it's the right decision, though, based on what you just said.
I think so. I think in terms of it being the right decision, I think there's a little bit less chaotic ways of doing it, which don't create such significant downturn in the short term. Obviously, when you talk about the AI supply chain, it's a very long-term game. And if we're talking 5+ years of chaos to reshore that manufacturing over the long term, is it worth that chaotic period to get there? That's the decision that I think needs to be kind of war gamed out and see if it's really worth it at the end of the day.
Yeah, one thing I really wanted to ask you about is we talked a little bit about the EU. NAFTA is a very different conversation. And we've talked about sort of Asia and the semicon impact on that end. One group that's reasonably new on the global scene, but I think maybe has a lot to gain in all this instability, is this BRICS alliance, the Brazil, Russia, India, China thing. Have you seen any moves coming out of that membership? Obviously, China's a big part of it, but in terms of that block and how they've been responding to all this sort of trade fluctuation?
India's a very interesting one in terms of the amount of activity that's going on from both the startup community and kind of the more established larger players in terms of their level of investment. It's a huge growing space within the AI market. But what I kind of see is a significant benefactor here could be the Middle Eastern markets, the kind of that domain, simply because they've already got a fair amount of startup activity coming out of Israel and other domains, but they've also now got a lot of investment funding coming in kind of Saudi Arabia and those kind of new AI markets, which have such a large investment now in data centers, in AI factories, in GPU as a service things. I think they could really have a significant opportunity, especially if they move closer to the China market. And obviously at the moment we have Donald Trump visiting Saudi Arabia, I think today or tomorrow. And what could come out of that, who knows? But I'm expecting something to certainly impact the AI market from that.
Yeah, for sure.
So let's put Reece on the spot. Put your crystal ball out there, and a year from now, where are we with respect to all these tariffs?
Oh, that's a challenging one. My guess would be we're going to have there'll be some form of trade deal with China. There will be tariffs imposed reciprocally to a certain extent. The majority of the impact will not be on AI or that market, but the major impact that I expect to have that will have on the market is not within China, not that kind of trade war that's been going on, but more so in terms of all of the other kind of APAC markets. So when we look at the huge impact that these tariffs, which will, I think, continue to exist and continue to be in place, maybe at a lower number for countries like Vietnam or Taiwan, etc. I think those will have a dramatic impact on the cost of servers, the cost of AI infrastructure going into the next year, next 2 years. And that will trickle down very quickly and have a huge downstream impact on cloud budgets and enterprise spend on AI, how costly services are, how costly software is. And all of that will filter into the speed at which the enterprise adopts AI. So that's kind of that would be my very high level, all the way down the market, how it impacts very much every single stakeholder going down.
And will we be saying, wow, he was right? Or will we be saying, oh my God, what a dumbass?
I would love to say I'd be 100% right there, but honestly, it could all change tomorrow with a major trade deal. So who knows?
We will we'll have to have you on to make an opposite prediction at some point in the near future. That way, no matter which way it goes, you're right.
That's right. So we know which one to air.
All right. Reece, thank you so much for chatting with us about this. It's all complex and so fast moving that we could probably do one of these a day and still have something new to talk about all the time.
Now, here's Ken with Jun Kawaguchi of Winbond.
Hello, friends, engineers, and developers. Welcome to another episode of Embedded Insiders Podcast. I'm Ken Briota, Editor-in-Chief of Embedded Computing Design, and I am so happy to be here with Jun Kawaguchi of Winbond, and we're going to talk today about memory and security and a bunch of good stuff. Jun, welcome to the show.
Hello, good to be here. I'm responsible for the marketing activities for Winbond's secure flash products.
Amazing, and I'm really, really excited to have this conversation. Memory has become, it's always been kind of a really important piece of the embedded puzzle, but it's only gotten more and more important with how many AI applications we're seeing and the amount of heavy use of memory that's been going on, which of course leads us to the how do we secure that memory conversation. So the place I'd love to start, and one of the more interesting pieces of this puzzle, I think, is in automotive.
Yes.
The cars are getting so much smarter and so much more complex, and of course that introduces potentially a lot of vulnerability along with function. So I'd love to talk a little bit about security, reliability of memory solution. If a vehicle loses its computer now, it's like in the old days if your transmission fell out. So how are we managing to avoid losing our metaphorical transmissions?
Sure. So the modern cars are defined, as you can see with Tesla type vehicles. We are calling it the SDV, or software defined vehicle. Um,
Mhm.
Basically, the car is fully capable of many functions already, right off of the factory, but it is kind of disabled, right? And then it is up to the user to buy whichever options, and then the software would enable those functions. So, there's a super fast mode, for example, things like that. Um, but in order to do that, the software obviously needs to be there, as well as it needs to be secured for a couple of reasons. One is that you don't want the software to be altered, and then the car becomes disabled, and that's
Right.
obviously a safety factor. Another is that from the manufacturer perspective, they don't want people to mess around with the software to enable them, when they're not paying for it. So that's another area for the manufacturer to secure them. Um,
Right.
the flash memory by itself can be altered, right? So you can look at the data sheet and you can, learn how to program if you have access to the devices. Secure memory, on the other hand, need basically a password or the code, to authenticate. And otherwise, unless it's authenticated by a secret code, you cannot change the content. So this is one way to secure the code for these software-defined vehicles.
It sort of sounds like the old like certificate model that like the internet uses and that kind of thing. Is it similar to that?
It's fairly similar. There's a increased level of kind of redundancy and then security aspect of it. So there's
Yep.
a lot of logistical challenges in managing. Once the vehicles are on the road by the millions, you need a very robust and effective way to manage them.
Of course. Another place where security is always critically important and more um memory is being used is in the industrial sectors, mining, manufacturing, all of these sort of big industrial operations that are becoming more and more connected,
Yes.
more and more embedded.
Yeah.
Um so that kind of on-premise security, in addition to firmware and data integrity and all that piece, is really complicated, and it all impacts memory security.
Yes.
I think in these cases, probably intrusion is the less troubling problem, and more it's about making sure that it's resilient to the sort of rough conditions. Am I right?
Absolutely. So, with the increased software content, what happens is that you need to update these software codes, especially in industrial application. The system may be in a very remote area, so there's no way to physically go over and then update them. So many of them already have kind of updating capability, over their update capability. Now, you want to make sure the updating is going to be done properly and then reliably, because you do not want anything to be bricked in the field, for example.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of ways to do this, but and many advanced methods are being developed. But the firmware needs to be done in a very secure manner, so that there's always a robust way to manage these.
Generally speaking, these updates are done over the air, right? Nowadays, it's very rarely needed to be visited physically, right?
That's correct. So many of the devices actually have the LTE modem built in these days, so it's basically a cell phone that's integrated to these systems, and then you can update them that way. Yes.
Are there some inherent security concerns that you need to think about with OTA and with those updates? Are
Yeah.
we
Yes.
worried about, a signal corruption or any of that kind of thing?
Of course. So there's error type situations where the updating might have an error, and then how to recover from this. If during the update process, if there's an interruption, power outage, will it recover properly instead of just getting bricked, right? And
Yeah.
you see many systems says do not unplug your system when you're updating, right? Well, it's
Right.
really impossible to manage that on an industrial application. So there needs to be a much more robust way to manage these updates. Yes.
Yeah, that makes sense. Um, I wanna talk a little bit about the difference between, like, you know, high performance computing and the memory that's needed there, and like edge computing and the memory that's there, and I know Winbond is sort of got your fingers in all the pies. So I'd love to talk a little bit about, for our engineer listeners, the differences, the things that they need to think about differently when they're dealing with high performance and data center and cloud versus the edge.
There's going to be many more systems in the field for the edge computing, as you can imagine. There's one concern is about data privacy, especially in the European market. That's a big concern. And how are these data being managed? And then is it going to be robust enough so that it doesn't leak, into the wrong hands, for example. So I think there's going to be many requirements, product requirements asked upon engineers to make sure that the content of the code, right, the privacy aspect of it is going to be well managed. It's not just about getting the code up and running, but how this is going to be managed, because there's going to be a lot of regulations around that.
Yeah, I think so. So let's talk a little bit about the future. It's we hear a lot of rumblings and whisperings and rumors about quantum cryptography and quantum computing.
Sure.
I think that's all still pretty experimental. It's still pretty much in the lab. I haven't seen any in the field cases yet. Maybe you have, and please tell me about them. But
Sure.
but that's coming. That people seem to think how that's going to impact everything about security. And so, what is the impact going to be to memory security in particular?
Sure. Quantum is, of course, still very new, but if in the wrong hands and if the target is valuable enough, then there would be an actor trying to use that to their advantages, right? There's few units available. Actually, you can even get on some of the supplier site and then make use of it by setting up an account. But anyway, the quantum, basically is going to render the conventional encryption, almost open. You can very easily break the code. Now there are newer standards, encryption standards, that is considered quantum proof or post-quantum ready. These are the new methods, and then we have products that is quantum ready. It really depends on the trade-off in terms of how much cost can be spent on these security systems. What are your systems? Is it a very highly valuable system, or is it like, let's say, an edge devices? So these are the considerations you might want to think about when planning for the quantum readiness. In many government installations, there are already requirements being set. So in order to be compliant with these standards, then it needs to be quantum ready.
Yeah, and let's talk about some of the standards that uh, are in place and are being developed to be in place, because so much of security is reliant upon standardization and that kind of piece. What are some of the standards that are being looked at for not just quantum cryptography and computing, but all future memory systems? I mean, those standards must be in progress already.
Yeah, so one of the more common ones is called CNSA 2.0. So this is published by the NSA as for commercial implementation, not for the military, but for commercial implementation. They're making recommendations, and then you can look it up. It's called CNSA 2.0, which outlines both the technology and the timelines for deployment. And many of the government-related systems will need to comply, but it is not just restricted to that.
Right.
Financial equipments and high-value systems, infrastructures, may want to implement these. One note about infrastructure is that these are the long life cycle systems. Once you implement them, you're not going to update the system for at least 10 years. So 10 years later, how popular will the quantum be available, right? So then infrastructure system in particular is something you really need to think about, because you don't want, train management system or, power plant control system to be compromised.
Right. I mean, that's probably, that concern specifically is going to, as always, slow adoption in those mission critical areas, I think, right? Like, I mean, obviously none of us can tell the future and none of us know what's going to happen, but it seems like historically that's why those mission critical areas like the power plant, like the train systems, are slower to adopt some of these newer technologies. It's because they need to be sure of standardization and reliability and resiliency and all that stuff before they get in. I assume that's still true in the memory space.
So for the memory implementations, so there, there are some reluctance in terms of the technology being stable. That's certainly true. But there are actually regulations kind of being, enforced upon, so that the manufacturers and the suppliers, will need to have compliant systems. And for that, actually, the timeline is getting a lot closer because, you know, I think the quantum system will be here earlier rather than later. We've seen a lot of news about the latest developments in the quantum systems by many suppliers, and it's happening a lot faster than I thought. So that's going to be the concern, I think, for the designers.
Yeah, I think that's true. It's very interesting that in the memory space those pieces are getting accelerated and moved forward. Um, because I think that, as we were saying earlier, memory is really important
Mhm.
and going to really continue to be the engine that drives, especially AI.
Yeah,
The industry seems very bullish on like generative solutions right now, and I don't know if you feel like making an opinion on that, but my opinion is that large model generative AI is not going to become the thing that gets used in these embedded and industrial spaces. It's much more likely to be small model, specifically tailored data sets and that kind of thing. And even then, I think the generative tools are going to be more on the analysis side rather than the operations side. So I think that for embedded and for memory, it's less about the 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 ability to hold huge amounts of data than it is about the reliability of always getting good retrieval, not having degradation, and being able to run analysis on collected data. I mean, do
yeah.
you feel like I'm in the same ballpark?
Yeah, I think for the edge systems, there continues to be an AI kind of model, but it's more of the learning aspect of it, which is going to involve a lot of code updating, right? Because as a system gets, learns more, you'd want to update the code base a lot more. It's less to do with the large models, because these are more for the generative and a more for general purpose application. But for the edge
Yeah.
devices, I think there's going to be basically the systems are learning a lot more, and then so the code base continues to be improvised.
Yeah, I think that's true. Um, let's stay in the future. I mean, what do you think uh what's your vision? What's Winbond's vision for the future of embedded system security? I mean, is it quantum stuff? Is it something else? Where do you see security moving toward, as
Um,
it's always a moving target?
Sure. So, in terms of security and then the secure memory technologies, I think the first kind of iteration of these products is that, what can it do, right? How much of an encryption is good enough, and then of course, then how much of the density, but how much do you want to hold? The next, I think, the iteration of these developments will be that how well can you do? So right now there's not a lot of focus on the performance aspect of secure memory. It is about how well can you encrypt, how strong can you encrypt them. But as it becomes much more prevalent, we will see more of a performance aspect of how fast can you process these things, and that's something that we're also looking into.
Very cool. As we're getting near the end of our time here, I want to talk a little bit about, like, I just want to sort of give you the field, basically. I always like to ask near the end, what didn't I think to ask you about? What didn't we talk about that you think it's important for our engineer and developer listeners to know about memory, especially as they're being asked to design more and more complex and more data heavy processing systems?
Yeah, so there's always a ways to use more memory, and then there's always ways to use faster ones. That continues to be the trend. Now, but if you can imagine, let's say 20 years ago, and if you open up a computer, you didn't have an antivirus software, and then today you cannot find one without it. So
Right.
there was obviously a change because there was a threat. There's a new threat, and then we work to kind of work around it and work against it. The flash memory these days are basically, it operates very nicely, but it's completely open. If you want to alter and then access the contents, it's very easily to do that. Now there's going to be, continued incidences, moving forward. So there's going to be a lot more need for not just an open type of storage solution, but a secured one. So the demand and a need for these secured solutions, secured memory, I think will continue on. So, it'll happen over time, but generally it usually happens sooner than you think.
Sooner than you think is the watchword for
Yeah.
embedded computing, I think.
Yeah.
And I'm really excited to see what's going to be happening out there. Jun, thank you so much for being my guest today. This has been a really great discussion.
No, thank you. It's great to be here.
Really appreciate you. Folks out there listening, make sure that you've subscribed to this podcast so you don't miss any of our episodes. And thank you so much for joining us for this episode of Embedded Insiders. I've been Ken Briota, your host.
Thanks for listening to this edition of Embedded Insiders. For more daily news, videos, and podcasts, visit our website at embeddedcomputing.com.